Hi, okay, so in this tutorial I'm going to look at matching the colors of our foreground to our background. So as part of a compositor, what you usually end up doing, if I turn the foreground off for a second, is you have different elements. So we've got a background plate here, and then we've got a foreground element, which is this helicopter. So a compositor's job is not just to take all these elements and put them together in one frame, but it's to match them up. And one of the things we have to do is match up the colors usually as well, and the luminance and so on. So in this image you'll see that the background itself is generally quite warm up to a sort of a point. It seems to be getting sort of you can see with the water they are sort of looking like they're becoming more white, but actually yeah, they are sort of going more blue. I'd say white's probably around here somewhere. So you can see the scene's actually got a variety of colour in there, but it's generally quite a warm scene overall, whereas the helicopter isn't, and the colours there sort of are more correct in a sense, but as to what you'd expect them to be, but we need it to take on the warm look of this scene because we're compositing it with the background. So one of the ways we may do that, is by just using curves. We may have looked at those sort of before. We might just go in and say, okay, let's jump to a red curve and let's turn that up slightly to add some warmth into the copter. Let's go back to our RGB, which allows us to adjust just the luminance, and let's pull down some of those shadows to start to make that a little bit darker as well, because you can see they're really being crushed around here. And what we may end up with is, you know, something that starts to match that up. It's got a little bit of a purpley look in this, or maybe we need to make it a little bit more yellow, so we pull up the greens. But really we're doing this by eye, and we're trying to judge whether it works or not based on how we perceive it. So I'm going to get rid of that. So another way we could do it is by actually taking some readings of the levels within the scene and then copying those across to the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to levels. So there we are. And I'm going to apply that to the helicopter instead. And in the levels property here we can adjust the sort of the shadows and the highlights property anyway. So we're going to do that, but rather than just doing it, and again similar, we can do it for RGB or red, green or blue, just like we did with curves. However, rather than just doing it by guesswork, we're going to do it based on numbers. So you'll see at the moment it's at 0 to 255. It's an 8-bit image, so it's reading those colors from that, and you'll see that as I drag the mouse along on this info panel here, we have our RGB values. That you got alpha as well, but there's no alpha sort of channel there. Oh, actually there is one there. But what'll happen is, as we sort of run that along and we read the background, you'll see that, like I said, those RGB values are sort of giving you some numerical data for that. So if you go to blacks, for example, very dark, you can see the RGB values now are generally very low. You can see they're still higher in the reds, which makes sense because it's actually quite a warm scene. So you can see we've got 10 for a red, 6 for a green, and 3 for the blue. If we take this across to, say, around where the sun is, where it's the brightest, you can see, yeah, you know, moving it around a little bit, slightly more on the greens, which kind of makes sense because it's more yellow. So the greens are slightly higher than the reds, and again the blues are the lowest. And if you go into here, the reds will probably be a lot higher because you can see that's very red, isn't it? So we're getting some information there about that, and you can see, like I said, that relates to here because we've got 0 to 255 values in there as well. You can actually, if you drop down on the info panel, by the way, if you can't see the info panel for any reason, you can go window and info to turn it on. You can change that to some other types of information, so you can have it show as a percentage. So now when I go into there, you'll see it just shows me as an overall percent there of RGB values. But notice that the levels is also changed to percent, so it'll always relate to each other anyway. So those numbers can be directly copied across. Or you can even go to say something like decimal, which is just 0 to 1. Okay, a lot of other compositing packages as well will usually work on something like that. If everything sort of runs from a 0 to 1 value, then you've got some commonality across different effects as well, so that normally works quite well. So I'll keep it on that, but it doesn't really matter. You'll see again this is gone to 0 is the black value and 1 is the white. So like I said, whatever you change the display to on the info panel, the levels will automatically represent that. So what we want to do now, we've applied levels to the helicopter, not to the background, and so these are the levels for the helicopter itself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the RGB values from here. I'm going to apply them to the white and the black. So in other words, I'm going to find the brightest point and the darkest point for the image, and I'm going to apply that to the brightest point and the darkest point of the helicopter. I say in the image, not the image itself specifically, because you'll see, like I said, that light in the center by the sun really is going to be the brightest bit, but the helicopter is never going to be that bright in the picture. So really looking more at levels that are comparable to the brightness we would expect that helicopter to be at. So if they match up, hopefully we should get a similar looking, a better match there. So like I mentioned, actually the water is probably a good point of white. However, you'll see it's getting more and more blue, and in fact if we go down here, you'll see the blues now are brighter than the greens or the reds, and that's because it's getting colder. So what I would do with this is perhaps look more at where the sort of the helicopter is and look at white values around that point. So maybe, you know, say somewhere around here perhaps. Let's try that. Maybe we'll see how it goes. And if it, yeah, we'll see how well it matches up, but you usually get a good idea of whether that's working. So like I said, on here we've got a lot of color changes, so it's quite difficult, but yeah, let's go for somewhere like that. So this is a bright point, so we're looking at a white. Hopefully that's the other difficulty as well, I don't want to be on the water. So there we go. So you'll see, so just to sort of generally round it up, you can see the reds are coming up at 0.87. So I'm not going to go all the way through. I could do though. The greens are 0.71 and the blues are 0.64. So I've got those values. So what I can do now is RGB, remember, is just like on the curves, is just the overall brightness. However, what I can also do is I can jump to red, green and blue. So if I go to red, for that output white, I can actually change that to 0.87. And you'll see the reds will kind of disappear from there a bit because they're lower now than the whites, than the blues and the greens. So I'm going to go into the greens, but I'm going to drop those down as well. And you see the greens are actually lower at 0.71. Okay, and then I'm going to go into the blues, which were the last ones I had, which was 0.64. 0.64. Okay, and so what's happening is now that orangey look that's sort of appearing from there is based on the same orangey values, or the color values for that the brightest part of that sort of wave. But I'll do the same thing for the blacks. Now again, with the blacks, could just go to sort of something that's high, you know, in a strong shadow, but it really again depends on, would the darkest part of the helicopter be the same as that, and I think in this case it possibly would be. So I'll have a look at that. So for this, we've got, for the reds we have 0.04, for the greens we have 0.02, and for the blues we have 0.01. So I'm going to do the same thing. So we'll just go down from red, green, blue, just do it. So this time we're going to do it to the output black. Before we're looking at the brightest bit and applying it to the white. This time we're going to go to the output black, and we're going to set reds to 0.04. Okay, and then we're going to go to greens. I'm going to set that up to 0.02, and we're going to go to the blues, and we're going to set that up to 0.01. Okay, so that's just made a slight difference on the blacks. So you can see what we're starting to get now is hopefully a helicopter that matches up a little bit better. Let's have again look at where we started with and what we've got now. So and like I said, with this image, it's got a lot of variance within it in regards to light, depending on which part of the image you look at. So you kind of have to ask yourself, where is that helicopter? So again, I mean, I use the blacks from here, but you know, I could also look at maybe the darkest point here, because you know that's where the helicopter's on. You can see here, it's still the same. The reds are the highest, the greens are slightly lower, and the blues are the lowest still. But it's 0.04, 0.07 actually. So it's still, I'll say that. No, actually, it looks like I grabbed a bit of green there, so it was slightly higher. I was going to say, but you should, you know, it's kind of just making sure you get the bit that corresponds with that as well. So again, even there, I think there is a bit of green in there actually. So my mistake. The greens are always kind of close to the reds. Even there, you can see it's while it's 0.10, greens are like 0.09, so they're quite close behind. But you kind of have to pick, where are you looking for. But you can see the darker parts here are nowhere near as dark as those bits there. Is kind of my point. And with the helicopter, with these dark elements, because when we adjust the output black, we're adjusting sort of the darkest points of this helicopter. Would they be sort of as dark as that? Would they be as dark as this? But either way, like I said, what you get is the helicopter starts to match up, like I said, with the environment. We kind of need that. Whether we end the composite here and we're sort of, or our work here and we're finished, we still need it to look the same. Or even if we're taking it further on to do some color grading, because again, if we took the scene as it was here to color grade, and we started to adjust the levels, the difference between the helicopter and the background will always remain. Even if we start to then add in a color grader warmer values to make this say more orange, we're going to end up making all the oranges that are already in the scene even stronger. So it's not really going to work. So before this goes off, we have to try to match this into the scene. So this is something that gets done in the compositor, and then it can be sent off for color grading. Okay, so give that a try and see how well you can match that up.